Right now, there's a lot of noise about the capital gains tax changes, and most of it is useless to you. It's either some politician telling you it's about fairness, or it's so deep in the weeds, you switch off after 30 seconds. So you're left knowing the 50% discount is going, but you've got no real idea what that does to your own shares or your own property. So I'm going to explain how the new system works. And then I'll run the numbers on 4 different scenarios so that you can see exactly how this lands depending on what you're holding. Under the old system, the deal was dead simple. You hold an asset for more than 12 months. And when you sell, only half your gain ever gets taxed. So if you make a $100,000 gain, only 50K of that goes into your tax return. That's the 50% discount that everyone's talking about. And it's the thing that's getting scrapped. What replaces it works in a completely different way. Instead of halving your gain, the new system lifts your cost base up in line with inflation. So you only end up paying tax on the real gain that sits above inflation. The thinking is that they don't want to tax you on the part of your gain that was just prices creeping up over the years. They only want to tax the genuine growth. There's also a minimum 30% tax floor sitting underneath all of it. And that floor is going to matter a lot more to some people than others. And you'll see in a minute. Now, I'll be straight with you. None of this is law yet. The bill's been introduced, but half the details aren't even in it, including the exact formula for how they'll split gains on assets you already own. The accountants' bodies have said the same thing, that you can't properly plan off a half-finished tax system. So treat these numbers as the shape of it, not the gospel. The one date you need to burn into your memory is the 1st of July, 2027. Because that's the line in the sand. Any growth your asset had before that date keeps the old 50% discount, and any growth after it runs through the new index system. So if you already own something, your gain ends up splitting across both. And honestly, the cleanest way to get your head around any of this is to stop talking in theory and run it on some real people. So let's do that. I'll start with the simplest possible case, which involves someone buying and selling shares entirely under the new rules. Call him Marcus. He buys $10,000 worth of shares in an ASX listed company in 2028, holds them for a couple of years, and sells them for $15,000. So on paper, he's made a $5,000 gain. Because he bought after the new system kicked in, there's no old discount in play at all. The whole thing runs through the new method. So his cost base gets indexed up for inflation to around $11,000. On a 47% marginal rate, that's about $1,880 in tax. Now, compare that to the 50% discount. That exact same sale price would have left him paying around $1,175. So Marcus ends up a few $100s worse off under the new system than he would have been before. And that tells you something useful straight away. Marcus is a normal earner, so his result is pretty intuitive, but it gets a lot less intuitive the moment you change who's doing the selling. Take Lorraine. She's retired and she's holding the exact same shares as Marcus. What's different is her income. Because she's living off tax-free super pension and her actual taxable income for the year, even once you count this gain, comes in under $18,200, the tax-free threshold. So under today's rules, she pays nothing at all on that gain, simply because her income's too low to tax. Under the new rules, she pays $1,200. And that's because of the 30% tax floor. The floor exists to stop people parking assets until a low income year and then selling them off tax-free. So even though Lorraine genuinely is on a low income, it still applies, and she cops a bill where she used to get none. If you're on the age pension, you're exempt from the floor, which means it really lands on the self-funded retiree who happens to have low taxable income in the year they sell. Marcus and Lorraine both bought after the new rules kicked in, so their whole gain ran one way. But most people watching this already own something, and that's where it gets fiddlier, because your asset is going to straddle both systems. Call her Bianca. She bought an investment property back in 1995 for $500,000. By the time we hit that 1st July 2027 line, it's worth $1.8 million, and she eventually sells it in 2035 for $2.5 million. Her gain has to be split into 2 parts, because the growth before the line and the growth after it gets taxed differently. The growth up to July 27, that's the jump from her 500K to 1.8 million value at that line, gives her a pre-2027 gain of about $650,000 after the old 50% discount is applied. Then the growth after July 2027, from that 1.8 million up to the $2.5 million sale, runs through the new indexed method and works out about $300K of taxable gain. Add the two together and she's got a total taxable gain of $950,000. And at a 47% tax rate, she pays around $446,500. If that whole gain had fallen under the old 50% discount system, she'd have paid about $470,000. So Bianca actually lands slightly lower under the new rules because she held it for so long that a big chunk of her gain is protected by the old discount on the pre-2027 side. Bianca's property was always inside the CGT system, so splitting it was reasonably clean. The real curveball is for the assets that never been taxed at all, and there are more of those around than you'd think. These are pre-1985 assets. Anything bought before September 1985 has sat completely outside capital gains tax for 40 years. So people have built whole plans around the fact these things are tax-free when they sell. Calling Ron, he bought a commercial property back in 1980 for $100,000. It's worth $2.4 million by July 2027, and he sells it a few years later for $3 million. Under the old rules, the entire gain would have been tax-free, because pre-1985, assets simply sat outside the system altogether. The new rules keep that protection, but only up to the line. So the 2.3 million of growth Ron had before July 2027 stays exempt, and that part of it is safe. The growth after July 2027 is the problem, because that last 300,000 or so gets pulled into the net for the very first time, and he ends up with a tax bill of around 141,000 on an asset that a year earlier would have cost him nothing. So the real takeaway here is that it's going to land differently on everyone. And the worst thing you can do is guess off a headline. If you understand where your asset sits relative to that July 2027 line, you're already ahead of most people. This stuff is still moving. The details are getting finalized as we speak. So for more on how these changes actually play out as the legislation lands, stay tuned on the channel, because we'll be breaking it down as it happens.